All right, we are 3.5 weeks into the season. I think now is a good time to start taking a look at what is actually starting to form in regards to the Mythic Plus meta. And as it turns out, it's been a lot more diverse than it has historically. Whenever you go back and look, you look at War Within Season 2, the season comes out, Vengeance, Demon Hunter, and Disc Priest are some of the most popular specializations. War Within Season 1 comes out, and it's immediately Frost DK. The tank meta was pretty wide open, but everybody was on Restoration Shaman. This season, as it's come out, and you can take a look, front page look of Raider.io here, Frost DK seems to be one of the most popular DPS, kind of the same with Arcane Mage, but beyond that, we got a lot of different tanks being played where it looks like Warrior is one of the top performers, and we got a lot of healers being played where you see Holy Paladin, Restoration Shaman, and Restoration Druid occupying the lion's share of that play at the very beginning. So we can separate this out into DPS, and as you can currently see here, whenever we bump this up, let's go 14 and up, because I think that's where we're going to start to see some of the more meta-defining trends. Whenever you slam this at 14 and up, you see that Frost DK and Arcane Mage are some of the most popular DPS, but then you see this purple specialization right here, and I'm not talking about a Warlock, we're talking about Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc Demon Hunter, I think, is on my radar to be one of, if not the best specializations on this patch. Wounded Quarry and their ability to be able to funnel, especially on high target counts, is actually incredibly impactful. This is something that we kind of knew. If you played like a Havoc Demon Hunter last season, it was kind of in a similar spot. It ended up getting nudged out of the meta just because Arcane Mage kind of did its job just better. But this season, Havoc Demon Hunter, off the back of a recent 5% aura buff a couple weeks ago, is in a position where I actually think their AoE damage is quite good, also compared to their funnel damage. And so they bring one of the most valuable damage profiles in the game. But then you also see Arcane Mage and Frost DK being pretty popular, which makes you kind of call into question what's going to be the best. I kind of have a suspicion that as it currently stands, Havoc Demon Hunter and Frost DK, those two specializations are very likely to play together in conjunction with a Protection Warrior, and that gives you a lot of Battle Shout value. Then at that point, you'd probably be looking to get a Bloodlust, so something like a Restoration Shaman makes a lot of sense. Maybe like a Hunter, you can play with like a Hunter, maybe something similar to comp that Yargi, Dr. J, Casual Addict, like some composition similar to this that they're playing, except play this with the Havoc Demon Hunter instead of Arcane Mage. Something like that could possibly work as well. Because Chaos Brand is actually very valuable, even with things like Frost DK and Havoc Demon Hunter, or Frost DK and Marksmanship Hunter, where half of Frost DK's damage is magic, half of Marksmanship Hunter's damage, Sentinel, is magic. Now, if we bump it on over to healers, you can see right here, there are basically only two healers that are getting played. Discipline Priest is being played somewhat. Maybe if Disc gets a buff in the next patch, we'll see Disc start to see a lot more popularity in terms of their play. It's a specialization that is horrible in raid. So if it ends up getting buffed in Mythic Plus, there's certainly a possibility that it sees play. But right now, it's kind of the question of, are you going to be seeing Restoration Shaman or are you going to be seeing Restor Druid? A lot of people are kind of speculating that Restor Druid is going to be more popular with the wizard compositions. Particularly, if you're playing something like Arcane Mage, Ellie Shaman, Dev Evoker. Something like that would work great with the Restor Druid. You get the nice Mark of the Wild for 3% damage, 1.5% DR. Restoration Shaman, Sky Fury buff is generically just very strong, right? But the advantage of the Shaman, obviously, is the Wind Fury aspect of the Sky Fury buff. So all the melee DPS love the Sky Fury buff. And then on top of that as well, they bring a Bloodlust, which not all of the specializations that we're actually starting to see in the meta do bring that Bloodlust. I mean, the only one realistically in the top few specializations that we're seeing so far on the patch is Arcane Mage. And, if you're playing a Frost DK and a Havoc Demon Hunter with a Warrior, does Arcane Mage make sense? It could just be that overtuned to where it does make sense. But we've seen Blizzard tune specs pretty close to one another in most recent seasons where the buffs are something that matters a lot more. Class buffs matter a lot more, and they tend to matter a lot more whenever the spec balance is a lot better. Whenever the spec balance is worse, class buffs matter a lot less, especially whenever specialization is doing 30% more damage. If you take like Shadow Priest and Dragonflight Season 4, for example, the best composition on that season was probably Aug-Evoker, Shadow Priest. People played Fire Mage, Aug-Evoker, Shadow Priest because that's what people in the MDI played. But realistically, Mage was not that good. Probably were supposed to be playing double Shadow Priest with an Aug-Evoker. Didn't really need the 3% raid buff because the Mage was doing 30% less damage. Okay, moving on over to tanks. We're actually seeing the big four here. So I think that Druid and Blood DK kind of with reasonable prediction, we're going to be the worst 2 tanks coming into the season. I think that still stands true. Now we're seeing a situation where Vengeance Demon Hunter, Protection Warrior, Protection Paladin, and Brewmaster Monk are all 4 some of the most popular tanks, and they're all actually quite good. Vengeance Demon Hunter kind of does something similar to what it did last season, where it's undying. It brings a lot of group control in terms of what it can deal with to the mobs. Its damage is a little bit lower than some of the other options, but it brings Chaos Brand. And so Chaos Brand is valuable, again, depending on the composition. If you think that Havoc Demon Hunter is the best thing that you can be doing on the patch, the Vengeance Demon Hunter stocks might fall a little bit. But, I think that both Havoc and Vengeance can be good. And I think that Vengeance in isolation is actually fairly solid if you want to play something very similar to what you did last season, where there's a lot of cast, like a very caster-heavy composition. Protection Warrior. This is something that is kind of contingent on a couple of situations. First off, Battle Shout, very, very powerful. Protection Warrior, just being able to grant Battle Shout to all your melee DPS, 5% attack power is broken, right? It's obviously better than the 3% Chaos Brand. It's obviously better than 3% Arcane Intellect for the Mage. 5% attack power, especially if you stack that with a bunch of other fizz damage dealers or people who can benefit from the attack power, that's obviously going to be super useful. The other thing that helps Protection Warrior is the fact that they just do a lot of damage. And if you go over to Mythic stats and we look at DPS here, you can actually go down here and look at tank DPS. And according to logs, Protection Warrior does tend to be the highest DPS from the tanks. Now, Brewmaster Monk and Protection Paladin are actually both quite close, so I don't think that that's a notch in Protection Warrior's belt, just so much more than both Brewmaster Monk and Protection Paladin. And I think that there's a chance that Protection Warrior ends up getting nerfed just because they are super powerful in raid. Because if you go look at some of the raid stats, pull these up real quick. If you go look at some of the raid stats, Protection Warrior just does so much damage that I think that there is a chance that they end up getting nerfed tanks. Yeah. I think there's a chance that they end up getting nerfed. If that ends up happening, they could actually slide a little bit out of the meta, but they're one of the top DPS dealing tanks while having the best buff for the melee and fizz dealers. Protection Paladin, this has been played. I mean, you see Stone, you see Broken Shun, you see Yoda all playing Protection Paladin. Protection Paladin is very useful if your specializations in your group are rather squishy, if the off healing is quite good. The downside of the Protection Paladin, of course, is that they have potential to die. Just point blank, they do have potential to die. If well piloted, they are still possible to be able to tank the highest level keys. It's not something that's really that bad. They have some of the best group utility in terms of sacrifice, spell warding, bop, just off healing. Those kind of things are very valuable. They're going to be a little bit lower damage than the warrior. They're going to be a little bit lower durability than the Vengeance Demon Hunter, but still pretty valuable. Last tank that we have here is Brewmaster Monk. And Brewmaster Monk, I would say, is the fizz version of the Vengeance Demon Hunter, where, fairly sturdy, brings Mystic Touch, which isn't always valuable, but it can be. I don't think that Mystic Touch is actually super valuable, but I think that this is going to probably be the most underplayed kind of tank specialization out of the big 4 that you're seeing here, just due to the fact that most people over the course of time haven't really acclimated themselves to Brewmaster. And unless Brewmaster just ends up being the best tank by a lot, then it seems unlikely. Brewmaster Monk, similar to Protection Warrior, does a lot of individual damage. And if you have a composition that works really well with the Brewmaster Monk, say things that do primarily physical damage, like an Outlaw Rogue, that obviously does primarily physical damage. Even the Havoc Demon Hunter, Marksmanship Hunter, those kind of specializations that do, maybe slightly north of 50% physical damage, that's where the Brewmaster Monk can really start to shine, and it works super well with something like the Restoration Shaman. Now, it does really work well with the Resto Druid, but I think that there's kind of this question as to where we're going to get Bloodlust. Not a lot of Bloodlust specializations looking super hot right now. Again, the only one that's really hot is Mage, so enhancement's not great. Whenever you're playing with a lot of fizz DPS, you would think okay, enhancement's probably a good one. Maybe not that good. Marksmanship, probably the best out of the DPS options for a full fizz comp that brings Bloodlust, and I've seen Yargi actually kind of cranking on marks, so that might be an avenue that people start to go down. But I'm really interested in seeing kind of how things shape up over the next couple of weeks. I wouldn't be shocked if we end up having class tuning, maybe even next week, where that kind of starts to shape the meta and see where that's forming. Be looking for an update over the next couple of weeks as to where the meta is starting to shape up and where it's starting to take form, and I will see you guys in the next video.